Well, hello there, YouTube. Take a little picture of my little desk lamp there. Well, here I am back again for another video. I thought this time around I would do some of the movies I grew up on, and, well, I'm going to take a look here. I want you guys to see something because that's a lot of them. And that stack right there is kind of what I want to go through, and maybe more than one part to this I'll post on YouTube. Obviously that these are movies that I grew up watching over the years. How do I want to say this? That, that they've always been a favorite on television for me and for rental and things like that. So, without further ado, we'll begin. We're going to start with this little pile right here. First one we got here is Footloose. Movie with Kevin Bacon and John Lithgow, Laurie Singer, and Diane Wiest. However you pronounce her name. This is a movie that obviously came later for me. I didn't see this until I was maybe about 12, 13 years old. Actually, no, it was earlier than that. There was a guy that line dancing was a big craze back then, back in the mid-90s, and one of the songs they would dance to was Kenny Loggins' Footloose. And I had no idea that it was a theme song to a movie at the time. Get that? But of course, it was made about the same time I was born, and didn't really catch on to it until finally one night I rented it, and I like what this movie stands for. Here's the tagline. He's a big kid. He's a big city kid in a small town. He said he'd never make it, but he had to. And, basically this movie's about a small town where they've outlawed dancing and rock and roll and things like that. And this kid is trying to prove to them that, it's not evil or anything like that, like they've been brought up to think it is. And it's not, that it's a way of celebrating life. Move on to the next one. Classic movie of the 80s. I was introduced to this when I was about 4 years old. It's John Candy and Dan Aykroyd in The Great Outdoors. Very funny movie. Of course, the most memorable thing about this is when Dan Aykroyd gets... Well, there's a couple things that this was memorable for me. Is the scene where Dan Aykroyd gets John Candy to eat this giant steak. And it's like what was the name of the old 96er? 96-ounce steak. And just some of the other stuff that Dan Aykroyd pulls on John Candy, that Dan Aykroyd's a big fraud in the movie. And of course, John Candy just wants to have an average vacation with his family. And of course, Dan Aykroyd comes and screws everything up. And the other scene that's really memorable for me is when the the bear comes into the cabin and just starts running amok, and John Candy ends up scaring the bear away by shooting the bear in the butt. Of course, not killing it, but exposing its skin and the sound it makes on the way back. It's hilarious. Of course, The Great Outdoors. Legendary movie. Yeah, if you're not if you don't like a good comedy, I feel sorry for you. They've since come out with a different cover to this, but this was like the first edition of this DVD. This is meant to be like an outdoor magazine. Of course, you can't see with my initials over it. It says here, outdoor fun for everyone. It says volume number one, like a magazine cover. And this was, of course, the poster to it. Funny movie, check it out. They have a different cover to this. But, The Great Outdoors. Funny movie. Next one is actually next to, and I want to kind of speed this up if they have a sequel, is Superman the movie and Superman 2. The reason this is on here is because, what kid didn't like Superman? Even even in the 80s, that even though looking at especially Superman 2, just how badly that was done, I know there's another version of it, that the Richard Donner cut. I have not seen that version. This is, of course, the Richard Lester cut, the version that was eventually seen in the theater. I didn't think it was too bad, but what I've heard, the Richard Donner cut is so much better. In case you don't know this, Richard Donner was fired on Superman 2. He was hired to do both Superman and Superman 2, and he had a little problem with the producers of the movie, who I think were out to destroy a piece of American culture, and he was eventually fired, mostly because of the success of Superman 1, and they didn't like the way he was doing things. But, Superman 1 is ultimate. It definitely is better than Superman 2. And enough said about it. Of course, my computer's making noises. I don't know why. The next three. Trying to move things off. Trying to make room on this thing here. Of course, this isn't in order, but I'll quickly pan them. It's the original Star Wars trilogy. This, being a kid of the late 80s and 90s, you, of course, had to rent these things, or, who didn't like Star Wars? If you were really into action or things like that. Now, I was going to include the other trilogy, but I thought, that didn't come until I was much older. But, of course, these will always be the favorite of the movies. Now, I don't have any particular favorite. I kind of look at it as one big storyline. Now, these DVD editions are the best ones to have if you're going to go DVD. Well, of course, this is the only version that's out now. This has, in case you're wondering, these have both versions. They have the remastered edition, where George Lucas went back or sent it into the computer and added a whole bunch of new effects to it. And it also has the original theatrical cut to it. It's not on Blu-ray yet, but I think it will be. And it'll probably have both versions too. Knowing George Lucas, it's going to have them. Probably. Now, if you're going to ask me my opinion on that, about what I feel about that thing, where they do that, if it's a studio maneuver, I'm not that big of a fan of it. But if the director does it, I'm all for it, because it's what the director wants you to see and not what the studio wants you to see. A lot of people disagree with me on that, but I prefer, the director's vision. Next up, we got The Wizard of Oz. This is the 70th anniversary edition. I don't know what age I remember first seeing this. It was very young. It was probably one of the very early age when I saw The Wizard of Oz. And this is one that, it's definitely a classic, and, you're probably always gonna be around. It's always gonna get a, complete remastering, things like that. And I know this version is out of print. I keep seeing a different version that in the store. It's got a different cover on it and everything else. And even with this version, they do a masterful job of remastering it. Warner Brothers, spared no expense on this packaging. Definitely on this movie, because it's an all new digital transfer. So it's the best as what DVD could be. So there you go. And it's got, even this version had a bunch of features on it. Everything from all the trailers, things like that. Now, the 1999 version DVD had a documentary with Angela Lansbury. It is also on this. However, it is a longer extended version. There was a bunch of other stuff that they added to it, and a lot more information that wasn't included on that previous edition. And the way I understand it, the third one has the making of film that had John Ritter in it and things like that. Next one, saw this when I was about 4 years old, believe it or not. This is one of the first. It was one of the first movies I'd ever owned on VHS. Unfortunately, throughout the years, the VHS was eaten in some cruddy VCRs, or a cruddy VCR we had at the time, and it's Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And this movie, just still to this day, it blows me away. Of course, this DVD casing is a little rough because I've had this since 2002, I believe, when it was released on the Vista Series DVD. Yeah. Of course, this was the first time that anybody had seen anything like this. This movie, combined, live action and hand-drawn animation that had been done in the past, but not quite to this caliber. And it wasn't as believable in the other movies. But this movie, it took it up a notch and made you believe that Bob Hoskins here and Christopher Lloyd and all the other castmates were actually talking and touching cartoon characters. It's always been a favorite of my movies. I've always been a big fan of the Amblin Entertainment movies of the 80s. And of course, all this other junk. This was one of the few projects that Spielberg did with Disney. I think he did about a total of 3 or 4 projects with Disney, and this was the first one. And I'm, of course, not counting the Roger Rabbit shorts, which are also on this set, which is interesting. They were released with other movies post this movie. Of course, my brother just came home. This was released. There was a whole bunch of other shorts that were released post this. One of them was featured in another movie I'll show on here called Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And it's really interesting to see all those shorts. Very funny. Basically, they were tribute to Tex Ritter cartoons. Moving on.